Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 4, Episode 5. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. The Detroit Lions. Oh, I've seen that Detroit Lions team before. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about the concept of adaptability. Are we all Dan Campbell at some point in our lives? Are we all Dan Campbell for most of our lives? The social medias were in an uproar this week, dear listener, over the Taylor Swift deep fake AI nudes. Let it once again be said that you can't trust anything that you see on social media. And the sabers are rattling. War with Iran. If you were willing to invite back into your life staggering inflation, dear listener, let's drop bombs on Iran. Thank you, everyone who returns every week to this podcast. This is why I don't vote. Thank you so much. If you're new, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, write a review, send a friend far and wide. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting. This is why I don't vote is on Patreon. Let the journey begin.
Act 1. I've seen that Lions team before, or Lessons in Adaptability.
Oh, I've seen that Lions team before. As many of you know, as a former Lions fanboy, probably a better term of art. As a former Lions fanboy, I've seen that Lions team before. Now, this is not the same type of team. The former teams, the teams that just fell apart in the regular season, they never had the awe-inspiring, the dynamic wins that this Lions team did. The 2023-2024 Lions, well, they won some games running the ball. They won some games throwing the ball. They won some games with special teams. They won some games with defense. It was the best Detroit Lions football team probably since 1957, in the modern era at least since 1991, where the Lions went to the NFC Championship game and got stomped by Washington. Did it shock me that San Francisco came out and dominated the second half in an excruciating way? It was almost like a slow-moving train that you started to see derail, and you knew what was going to happen, and you wanted to look away, but you couldn't, and you wanted things to be different, but you knew they wouldn't be. This isn't the story of a Lions football team that just fell apart in the second half. This is the story of decisions that were made, things that happened that helped the collapse occur. That's why it was so excruciating. You saw some of the decisions being made. You had a bad feeling. You had that sinking feeling in your gut. You knew that if it didn't work out, everything was going to go south from there, and things just didn't work out. Is there a lesson that can be learned? Is there something that we, as fans, as viewers, as people, is there something that we can take away from that football game that's applicable to our lives, to our everyday lives? We'll explore as much, dear listener, in this segment. Let's speak to the game itself. Going forward on fourth down, where you are down by 3 points and you can kick a field goal, a 48-yard field goal, a very makeable field goal for a field goal kicker in the National Football League, and you decide to go for it. You do this in the first or second quarter, well, it's questionable. It may be excusable. You do this in the third quarter, that's a lot more suspect. You do it in the fourth quarter, it's just stupid. The Lions went for it 3 times on fourth down and didn't convert any of them. The Lions went for it on a fourth down where they could have kicked a 48-yard field goal to tie the game in the second half. They went for it and did not convert. Granted, there was a play where a Lions defensive back had the ball hit his face mask while trying to intercept it. And the San Francisco player, Ayuk, caught the ball at the 4-yard line. Reynolds, the wide receiver, dropped a couple of balls, one of them on a fourth down conversion. Going for it, though, on those fourth downs, it seemed as if Dan Campbell, because he was unsuccessful in the prior fourth down conversion, he was dead set. He was ready to double down. He was going to go for it again, and he was going to make it the next time. And that's the lesson that I believe that we can take away from what happened to the Detroit Lions, the mindset of one Dan Campbell. Being so committed to something that has been successful for you in the past and not being able to look at the difference in circumstances, not being adaptable to what's happening around you to realize that maybe something that has helped you earn money, that has helped you in relationships, that has helped you with your own personal mental health, these successes may just be for a season in your life. They're not genies in a bottle. They're not always going to bring about the same results. Yet we are very often, as people, committed to the things that have brought us success in the past, so much so that we will force a round peg into a square hole for the rest of our lives trying to recreate that same success. Detroit Lions at Dallas Cowboys near the end of the season, a famous game now for but one play, one of the last plays in the game. For those of you unfamiliar, the Detroit Lions are down by 7 at Dallas. There's only a couple of minutes left in the game. Dan Campbell pulls aside the offense and says, hey, we're going to go down. We're going to score a touchdown. We're not going to kick the extra point. We're going to go for 2 and win the game in regulation. We're not going to overtime. What does Detroit do? They march down the field. They score a touchdown. The Lions had a special play that they knew they were going to run in this situation if the situation presented itself. They ran the play. Of course, it was successful. The referees threw a penalty flag for what they perceived to be a procedural misstep, and it caused quite the uproar. I'm not going to go into all of it. Here's the point that I want to make, and I think it's applicable not only to the decisions that Dan Campbell made in the game against the San Francisco 49ers, it's applicable to his mindset, and it's applicable to the concept of adaptability and having something that has been successful for you in the past not be successful for you in the present, and particularly given the circumstances that you face. What happened when the Detroit Lions were assessed that penalty? Dan Campbell had made that commitment. We're going to go down. We're going to score. We're going to go for 2. We're going to win the game in regulation. After that penalty, the Detroit Lions were faced with a 2-point conversion at the 7.5-yard line, or they could kick the extra point and go into overtime. Dan Campbell elected to go for 2 from the 7.5. Now, the details being irrelevant for the point that I'm making, Dallas Cowboys took their own penalty, and it went right back to being at the 2.5-yard line. But Dan Campbell was fully ready to run that play and go for the 2-point conversion at the 7.5-yard line. Yes, of course, if a penalty is assessed and it's taken, it very likely means that you weren't successful on the play you were running, and Detroit wasn't successful on the 2-point attempt. But for the Cowboys committing their own penalty, Dan Campbell would have gone for it, gone for a 2-point conversion from the 7.5-yard line, not made it, and lost the football game. That, in spite of the fact that he could have just kicked an extra point and tied the game. Cramming round peg into square hole. The Detroit Lions over the course of the 2023-2024 football season have gone for it more than any other team. I believe more than any other team in history. Have converted more than any other team. I believe more than any other team in history. So there is a precedent. And yet, can that precedent be as much of an impediment as it can be an advantage? Do we not do the same things? Do we not make a commitment in our heads to do something, and then regardless of the circumstances that we encounter, we refuse to adapt? We have married ourselves to a decision, we've married ourselves to an action, and we're going to undertake it no matter what happens. There is merit in perseverance. There is merit in continuing on no matter what the circumstances may be. But that does not dismiss, and I could probably use much stronger language, it does not negate the necessity to be adaptable, to be able to change things when they need to be changed in order to be successful. You want to go for 2 at the end of the football game to win in regulation? You actually convert? You are married to the outcome, and then you're assessed a penalty? Well, it's terrible. You were robbed. You were cheated. It's got to feel awful. You do the smart thing, though. You kick the extra point. You go into overtime. and you carry the momentum of tying the game at the end of regulation into that overtime, giving yourself an opportunity to win. You don't commit yourself to an action that no longer has nearly the chance to be successful simply because you've already made that decision. You don't go for it on 4th and 3 late in the second half when you can kick a field goal, a manageable field goal for an NFL kicker, and tie the football game. We all learn more from failures than we do successes. And we can all learn more from others' failures versus their successes if we pay close attention. I've made many decisions where I knew that I was going to be successful because that approach, that set of circumstances, everything seemed aligned because I'd been successful in the past to be successful in the present, to carry that success forward. And it doesn't always work out that way, dear listener. In fact, it very often is a trap. If we are all here to grow, if we are all here to learn, God wants to present to you more difficult circumstances, more difficult situations. The things that you've done in the past aren't necessarily going to be successful in the present, particularly when the circumstances have changed. Very often, success is just a short-term blessing. It can have long-term consequences if we marry ourselves to a set of circumstances, a set of decisions, and a set of outcomes, and we have no room to grow anymore because we've created these impractical expectations. This always has to work out because it did in the past. Dan Campbell went to his morning press conference the day after the game and stated that he wouldn't change any of the decisions that he made. He stands by them. I hope, for his sake, for his growth as a football coach, for the Detroit Lions franchise, for the city of Detroit, the state of Michigan, that what he said was just bravado, that it's not true. If it is true, well, I've got some bad news for you. As a former Lions fanboy, I've seen that Lions team before.
Act 2. You can't take the degradation out of pornography, and you can't take the fake out of social media.
Oh, the internets were in an uproar over the Taylor Swift fake AI nudes that were circulating for a limited period of time. I believe it's on Twitter or X or whatever the hell they call it these days. This is a real problem, and I'm not going to trivialize it, although I think the way it's being approached by the legacy media and a number of different types of groups advocating greater scrutiny, greater censorship of different profiles, this is not the right approach. There have been a number of conversations when it comes to pornography about different types of pornography, and there even being a set of pornography that's supposed to be softer and is supposed to eliminate, if you will, the degradation involved, not only for the female actors, but for the male actors. It is a degrading experience to be involved with pornography. Google Life After Porn documentary series. For every one porn star that speaks highly of the industry, you've got 10 whose lives are a mess. Am I comparing pornography, pornography sets, the consumers of pornography to social media? Yes, I am, because they're exactly the same. If you were consuming pornography, you have to understand that it's a bastardized expression of love between two people. You have to understand what you're consuming. If you were on social media, you have to understand what you're consuming. It's a bastardized version of real life. It's all fake. The influencer who you think is living this great lifestyle, fake. Fake. They are very often paying for many of the photo ops that they're involved with. And to the extent that they aren't paying, the pictures that they're taking or the video clips that you're seeing, they're all staged. How many of these influencers have been exposed to be frauds? Whether they are beauty queens, whether they are people lifting weights, diet, exercise, gurus of any stripe. I mean, there are countless: spirituality, sales, stock trading, crypto trading, NFTs, real estate icons. I am certainly not the first person to say this, though I will parrot it. It strikes me as odd that people who are making $100 million a year in any industry are pining for you to come on to some sort of interactive virtual training to learn the very art of what they're doing, it seems that that would be a step down in their business enterprise until you realize the reason why they're making $100 million is because they've got people just like you, just like me, who are paying obscene amounts of money to go to a virtual training, the substance of which may have never generated them any value. The only value they've derived is creating something that they can market for you to buy in the way of training via social media. Now we've gotten the apex fake, the artificial intelligence fakes. All of the models on Instagram are soon going to be AI fakes. None of them are going to be real people. Real models are going to go the way of the dodo. All of these gotcha videos that you see, scenarios made out to be real, fake situations created by influencers to drive content, to drive clicks, that's all going to be fake to the nth degree. The situations will be fake, the people will be fake, the circumstances will be fake. What's the takeaway? It's simple. You take everything that you see on social media with a grain of salt. You don't go in believing any of it. You don't watch pornography to learn about how a man and a woman in a loving relationship express as much physically. You don't watch pornography believing that the two people acting in the scene actually have romantic feelings for one another. It caters to a base instinct. You must go in to the extent that you're even going to participate understanding as much. If you go into McDonald's and expect to get filet mignon and you're disappointed, whose fault is that? If you go on social media and expect to be informed, to receive information that can inform you on a daily basis about the world around you, only to subsequently find out that it's all fake, that you were tricked, whose fault is that? The medium is what it is. Let's accept it for as much. You go on social media for cheap entertainment, for a quick laugh, to post a couple of photos to keep your loved ones informed about what the kids are doing so they're not calling you all the time, to click a couple of thumbs up or a couple of hearts so you don't have to call the people that you consider your friends. Call me negative, call me pessimistic. I've been saying this now for years. Social media will turn us into a culture like the Chinese, and I'm not sure that it's a bad thing. The Chinese look at the media in their country and they realize it's all state-run, it's all propaganda, they can't trust any of it, they can't believe any of it. They've learned to live their lives, meaningful lives, eventful lives, without relying on their emotions being triggered by what they see on social media or on the news. As Westerners, as Americans, we like to consider ourselves more educated and more informed and more cosmopolitan than any other people, than any other population of people on the planet. It simply isn't so. Our news is just as manipulated, and it is on us as consumers to do what? To turn our heads. Our best opportunity to change course, to correct, is to control our attention, is to turn it off. Turn off the 24-hour news network. Get away from your phone. Stop participating in social media to the extent that you do. And more than that, stop reacting to what you see on social media like it's Moses coming down from Mount Sinai with 2 stone tablets. Where shall we get our news then? Where are we going to go for information? There are plenty of alternative sources of information. Electronic publishers. You have The Intercept. You have Substack. You have Medium. You have Public. If you're paying attention, you'll notice that most real journalists are flocking to these mediums because there's no place for them anymore in the legacy media, particularly on television or in print. I never thought I'd be saying this. Thank you, Taylor Swift. Thank you for bringing to the public's attention, to the government's attention, the threat that AI presents in its deep fake. Let us all, in accepting the landscape for what it has become, act accordingly. Tune it out, turn it off.
Act 3, Rooting for a War with Iran? Prepare to welcome back staggering inflation.
I did a segment a few weeks back about how the United States is basically using its service members, our brothers and sisters who are serving in the military, as bait so that these Iranian proxy militia groups, and even calling them that is probably an exaggeration. It's like saying because the United States is giving Ukraine or Israel money, that Israel is a proxy group for the United States' foreign policy, its military-industrial complex. The same could be said for Ukraine. We know that's not the case. We'll call them militias that are funded via sources from Iran, and these militias have been engaging in practically 24-hour, 7-day-a-week attacks on U.S. military installations all over the Middle East. These attacks were undertaken ostensibly because of the bombardment, if you could call it that. You could call it the military action. You could call it the genocide, whatever your political, whatever your social proclivity, that's taking place in Gaza by the IDF, the Israeli military. Unfortunately, this week, U.S. service members were not only critically wounded, 3 of them were killed. And in predictable political theater, the dog and pony show has started for attacks on Iran and retribution. The whole thing is comical, but for the fact that it's so tragic. The entire situation is absurd in its predictability. It has also triggered one of the most unique circumstances in the course of human history, and that's not an exaggeration. You have a military force that has access to the Red Sea, to the Strait of Hormuz. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. This military force is the Houthis in Yemen, and they don't have a ship to speak of. This is not a country with a moderate navy, with an adequate navy. They don't have a navy. For the first time in human history, a nation that abuts a large body of water can enact a naval blockade without any ships. 21st century technology has allowed a country that we would consider primitive by Western standards, in the West, very likely many of us do consider primitive, the Houthi government in the nation of Yemen. Using relatively inexpensive drone technology, the Yemenis, the Houthis, can attack commercial shipping vessels all over the Red Sea, all over the Strait of Hormuz, and they can limit the number of ships that are going to be able to take cargo from point A to point B through that vitally necessary maritime thoroughfare. Many of the world's largest shipping companies have already come out and said that they're not going to use that route anymore. They're going the way of Cortez. They're going the way of Magellan. They're going all the way around the Horn of Africa in order to ship goods from the east to the west. Guess what? That's going to cause inflation. The cost of shipping goods that we take for granted, because we live in this global economy, we all bought in, cheaper goods and services, we can get things from around the world. All we need is that stuff to get from point A to point B. Well, it's gotten extremely expensive to get things from point A to point B because the Houthis have enacted an embargo on commercial shipping around their nation, which is one of the most traveled thoroughfares in all of maritime shipping. And they're doing it with drone technology that's relatively inexpensive. And the most powerful navy in the world, the most powerful navy perhaps in the history of the world, the United States Navy, can't do anything about it. Our slow-witted politicians' response, government's response, bureaucracy's response, let's bomb some people. Let's drop some bombs on them. The Saudis dropped bombs on the Houthis for 7-8 years, and we paid for it. We funded it. We supplied all the weapons. We paid for it. It didn't work. Now we want to drop some bombs on Iran, thereby very likely creating another choke point, creating another area of the world that commercial ships cannot pass through. It hasn't really hit yet, and that's the way things work when you've got a global economy. The prices of goods and services have not yet shown the ripple effect of what's going to be this increased cost in shipping from point A to point B because of the conflict that we have surrounding Yemen, surrounding Iran. We've seen it in fuel prices. We haven't seen it in the price of retail goods, commercial goods. It's coming. And as we saw during the pandemic, when corporations see the opportunity to price gouge and blame it on inflation, they're going to seize that opportunity. As it stands, we will see increases in prices in the next 90, 120 days. The shipping companies are going to pass those costs on to their customers, and their customers are going to pass it off on their wholesalers, and their wholesalers are going to pass it off on their retailers, and the retailers are going to pass that cost on to us, the consumers. In righteous Prop Joe fashion, yes, shout out to The Wire, you add a little bit of cost and you add a little bit of profit to your own bottom line in each one of those layers. The shipping company, yes, it will cost more because they're going to have to take a longer route in order to get goods from point A to point B, and they'll add in a little margin for their own profit. And all of those folks working at the docks, all of those folks who are getting those goods to these warehouses, these wholesalers, they're going to add a little bit more cost because it's more expensive for them, and they're going to add a little bit more profit. And down that daisy chain it goes until we, the consumer, are paying for not only these increased costs, we're paying for everyone else's increased profits. That is a foregone conclusion. That's coming. If we, the United States of America, instigate a further global conflict by attacking Iran, there's no telling how that will conflagrate, how that may increase the scope of the conflict in the Middle East such that there aren't any commercial ships that can go anywhere near that region of the world. The prices of goods and services in the nation of Israel will skyrocket, and the United States and other Western countries will not be far behind. Think carefully, dear listener, about what it means to engage in a conflict with the nation of Iran. Think carefully about the consequences not only to the lives of the U.S. service members, think carefully about the costs that it's going to incur, particularly here in the West, to the Western pocketbook. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.